Hi, everybody, and welcome back. We are now on to week 3, chapter 3, which is about sensation and perception. So, this assignment that you have coming up will be due on February 8th. I know a few of you asked about what days of the week it's on. I don't have one set day of the week that I have your assignments on. So, please make sure that you go back, look at the syllabus, and look at the due dates. Instead of having a bunch of mini assignments that you're working on very quickly, I really want you to have a good comprehensive understanding of the concepts for the intro class, so that way as you move on into your careers and further your education, you have a really good solid understanding of what's going on at the basic level, so that way you know how to move on in your careers, whether you're working with children, adults, going into research, etc., etc. So I spread the assignments out a little bit more, so that way you have about 10 days to complete an assignment versus one every week. So for this week, as I said, we're talking about sensation and perception, which is pretty cool. When you think of all those optical illusions and different things that happen, brain games, whatnot, that you're trying to find things, that's all part of sensation. That's all part of perception. So when we think about these two things, sensation is basically our sensory organs, eyes, nose, taste, hearing, touch. All of that are sensory. It's information that's coming in from our sensory organs. And then we have perception. And perception's a little bit different because it's how the sensory information is coming in and how it's organized and how we take notice of it and understand it. So sensory is usually going to be the same for everybody. You know, you hit something, you get burned, ouch, we feel it. Smells are going to be the same. Some people, vision, if we look at an apple, we're going to know it's an apple. But that perception piece is really going to be different. Why is it some people have stronger smells or stronger reactions to smells? Why is it that sometimes people see things differently or understand things differently? And that's because of perception, that process that the information goes through in order to get to our brain. We also have what's called in the book that you'll see thresholds. What's the minimum? What's the maximum? What's the just noticeable difference that they talk about for people to understand and take in this information? So what happens is when information comes in, there's actually an electrical process that goes through our brain. So the information comes in, and the sensory receptors take over, and they translate this information. I'm just looking at my notes over here. They translate this information through a process that's called transduction, and they convert the information into neural impulses. And after last week, neural impulses is how the information gets into our brain so that the brain can understand it. So neural impulses is the language of the brain. And then these impulses go to the specific areas of the brain that we talked about last week in order to process it. So the motor cortex is in the top, our occipital lobe is here in the back. Hearing and language is kind of back here behind our ears. Nose is kind of in the midbrain, kind of behind things. So it takes that information and sends it to different areas. Sometimes we talked last week about neuroplasticity, and sometimes when those neural impulses happen over and over again, it creates a very definite path, and then people adapt. So, for example, one example is people who smoke don't smell the smoke on their clothes. They don't smell the smoke on their hair. They don't taste the smoke in their mouths. Same thing, some people who wear a lot of perfume, same thing. They always wear a lot of perfume. They don't notice how much they're wearing. Working in a school system, you don't always notice kids' smells all the time. You get very accustomed to them, and your body and your brain basically adapts. So that way, it reduces sensory awareness, which isn't always good. It's not always healthy, but that is something that can happen. So the book goes through quite a bit about vision. Vision seems to be one. We have optical illusions. It also talks about hearing. So as you're doing your assignment, and I'll talk about that as a little bit, you really want to go through those theories that are discussed within the text, and you can research those theories even further, and really understand what goes on. Talking a little bit about endorphins, talking about some of the sometimes in the book when it talks about pain, because why do people feel pain more than other people? There's psychological factors that go on, but there's also cultural factors that go on, and talk about those a little bit, depending what you did and chose to do your research on. So when we have sensory information, I think we can all understand that sensory information is just not one piece. Um, we don't take in one piece of information. We use kind of all our senses. We're seeing, our smells start to happen. We also hear, even if we're seeing something, what is the color? What is the shape? So we're really looking at information perceptually. And so our brain organizes that information. Anybody who has children, who's ever worked with an occupational therapist, sometimes adults as well, there's a test of visual perceptual organization. How is your brain processing that visual information and organizing it? Is it organizing it effectively? Are you taking in the information effectively? Because if you're not, that impacts you in many other places, such as driving, walking, writing, and things such as that. So think about that. Let's see here. My apologies, just checking out my notes. You also want to, on the discussion board, I did put in some visual optical illusions. I also gave you some links that I've used with children to kind of develop different senses. Those are just kind of fun to look through. Some of them are based on kids, but adults use them as well. So definitely do that. I've also posted a link or gave you suggestions about researching smell dating, which is, I guess, something new. Looking at the pheno. Can't remember the word. My apologies. But yeah, smell dating, I guess, is a new thing. I don't know about that one. So, but when you're also thinking about perception and when you're thinking about sensation, think about some of those factors that influence sensation and perception. What happens with attention? What happens when people are paying attention to something else? They don't always realize what's going on over here. For example, you drive to and from work. You do the same route every day. Some people, like, you're listening to music, you're jamming out, you're looking around, you're thinking about the day. You don't even, all of a sudden you're at work. You're like, whoa, I'm at work, yay. Then you have a day where it might be snowing or you're asked to take a detour. So you're focusing a little bit more. Your attention is there a little bit more. You're paying more attention to what's directly in front of you. Then we're all of a sudden now driving to work, but now we have to go to a different time of day. So we're driving at night in a snowstorm and we have to take a detour. This is where we become white-knuckled. You're very focused on what's in front of you, making sure that you're driving correctly and very safely, and you don't even hear what's playing on the radio. You don't notice what's going around you. You may not even notice the car accident that happened in front of you. Hopefully you've noticed it, but you may not notice if there's a car off the side of the road right away, because attention and focus impacts what we're perceiving and what we're understanding and what we're taking in. As I mentioned earlier, there's cultural factors that come in, especially when we talk about pain. Prior knowledge. What is our prior knowledge? So sometimes, you've been in an accident. You have to go back through that same intersection where the accident happened. Think about what happens to your senses. Think about what happens to your perception. Another example may be you may have had You may have had too much to drink one time, and then all of a sudden you're at a party and they bring out that alcohol, and you're like, no. Or you go to a restaurant and you eat, people always talk about tuna fish. Oh, they ate tuna fish and then they were really sick afterwards. Even the word tuna fish can sometimes send people's stomachs grumbling off into Never Never Land, because they really don't want to think about that tuna fish. Another example, even this morning, I was grocery shopping with my son and he wanted to get some meat. After putting the meat in the bag, he went over and got some hand sanitizer, and immediately he started talking about the doctor's office and getting shots just because of the smell registered something in his brain. I mean, granted, we're in the grocery store, but with all those instances, you're not in the same place, you're not necessarily in the same environment, but we were in the grocery store. But that smell of the hand sanitizer registered in his brain that this is associated with the doctor's office, and what's associated with the doctor's office for him, unfortunately, is shots. Not the only thing that happens there, but that unfortunately is a negative that happens, and that's kind of where his brain goes. That's his perception. People in hospitals, you may have hand sanitizer, and this is something that you do all the time. You don't even realize that you're smelling it anymore. Um, so those are some different things to think about. Um, there's also social perception. What goes on with our environment? What happens with social situations? Because sometimes that plays into our sensation and perception as well. This isn't a health and human development class necessarily, but as we talk about development, one of the big questions, development, does it have to do with nature or does it have to do with nurture? Research really shows it has to do with both. So there is a social and cultural piece that goes on with development, with how our brains develop, with how it interacts with our personalities, that we'll be discussing from here on out. So thinking about the purpose, thinking about and understanding how we use our senses, because a lot of people don't think about that. And how do people adapt to various senses? So for the assignment that I posted, you actually have two choices. You only have to do one. You don't have to do both. One was a bit of a fun one that I wanted to post to you. That was basically you're going to have somebody kind of feed you some food that you can't see or smell. How do you think, and then really think about, and this is where you're going to have to be mindful, think about, when they're feeding you, how does a taste change? If they're feeding you, say, a strawberry, we can all, strawberries are sweet, sometimes they're tart. What is the texture? Closing your eyes and plugging your nose is going to have huge effects on your taste buds, especially when you're not used to eating that way, not seeing what you're eating. Because, vision has a lot to do with it. The book talks about, I think, green food coloring in food, but one of the things I can always think of is blue raspberry. Raspberry to me is supposed to be red, so when kids show up, this is raspberry slurpy thing, or oh, I have raspberry yogurt, or I have raspberry ice cream and it's blue. To me, that's a little to me that's a little off, it's not something that I want to try. That's not something that I want to be eating. I was talking to a student because they now make yogurt in these little pouches that don't have to be refrigerated, almost like the pudding cups that don't have to be refrigerated. Now they have yogurt in pouches that don't have to be refrigerated. And just me, my personal opinion, maybe part of my own food issue personality, thinking it's yogurt, it's supposed to be refrigerated. So we have these cultural pieces that come in, these social pieces that come in, that we have, that go about. How many people smoke socially just when they're around a certain group of people or they're at a certain place? So sensation and perception also has that social piece that you really, really want to think about, and think about as you're doing your assignments. So as I was saying, and I got off track, my apologies. So the first one is you're going to be really trying some different foods, having someone that you trust feed you some different foods. And then you're going to really be mindful and kind of take note of what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're tasting, without those other senses there. The other assignment, you're more or less researching what sense do you feel you could live without, and that's where a lot of the research comes in. You're going to want to tie in some of the brain-based information that we talked about and you learned about last week, what's going on in the brain, but also thinking about too, people do adapt. Last week, and I tried to find the article. My son does archery, and we were reading about the Paralympics and different archery Olympians and whatnot. And there was a gentleman who has no arms, and he is now a world class archer for the Paralympics. You kind of need arms, you would think, to do that, but he figured out how to do archery because his family hit some hard times, like many families in this country are having, and so he learned to shoot a bow because he had to in order to feed his family. Sometimes desperate times need desperate measures. And so he taught himself how to shoot a bow and arrow in order to feed his family. And now he's a world class Olympian. We see some people who come back from the wars who are very strong and very courageous after losing limbs, sometimes multiple limbs, and other people who have a difficult time coming back and recovering from those types of injuries. So thinking about, the differences, we've got kind of a gamut that goes on, that we've got this end that's yay, great, and then this side that's, really has a difficult time of regaining any sort of functionality in order to be in life. What's kind of going on. And there's a lot of factors that go on that we're going to discuss throughout the semester that may play a role in that we'll be learning about, but just something to think about. So as you're researching, definitely, think about the other factors that are in the book. Many of you may want to try just for fun. You don't have to do 2 assignments, but as I said, if you want to, like, one night at dinner and you're having fun with your kids or something, and you want to be blindfolded and plug your nose and have your kids feed you, and you just want to do it for fun, or you want to do it to them just for fun, feel free to post your results. Again, I take all the information that you post throughout the week into consideration, that when I'm doing the kind of final grade of the week, do you have a comprehensive understanding of the concepts? So, being able to relate whether you're eating the food, whether somebody else is, and how they act and what they're thinking and doing, what they report that they taste, can all definitely be part of something that you post. You don't have to research it fully. You can just say, hey, it was a fun Saturday night. This is what we did. This is what we found. But then the other paper, you'll definitely want to include that outside research. So this week, I'll be grading your first assignments. I try to get those done pretty quickly because I know you're pretty anxious after the first assignment, so that way you can see how things are and where you're at, and I can see where you guys are at. But if you have any questions, feel free to let me know, and have a great week.